So if you were here last week, we did talk a little bit about longings, and Rich we did this really cool interactive dialogue about human longings that we all have. And the longings we have, they're longings that kind of cross the spectrum of cultures and genders and ages, even time periods. They are longings we have had since the beginning. And we talked about how these longings are what N.T. Wright calls echoes of God's voice. We talked about the longing that humans have for justice, for putting the world to rights. And we talked about the longings we all have for relationships, for knowing and living in that truth that we are made for each other. And we talked about the longing we have for spirituality, for connecting to the something more that we instinctively know is out there. And we talked about the longing that we all have for beauty and the longing we have to contribute to that creative impulse that adds beauty and adds goodness to the world, and also that longing we have to rest in the beauty of this world and to find ourselves at home in it. And these are all longings that we all have, and if we pay attention to them, I think we're going to find that they are calling us and they're pointing us to this loving God, and that if we follow these longings to Him, I think we'll also start to see that they are the gift. They are the true gift that He then gives back to us. They are kind of the point of our life with God. So over the course of this year and over the course of this fall, we're going to explore these echoes as a framework for our life together, going down this road together. And we're going to follow how they lead us to Jesus, and we're going to listen to what He's inviting each of us as individuals and as a community to do through these longings. So this morning we're going to, as we've kind of alluded to, unpack what it means to long for relationships, what it means that we are meant for each other and made for each other. N.T. Wright calls human relationships a signpost that point the way into the mist, telling us all that there's a road ahead. They call us to something and someone more than ourselves. Relationships and our desire, we all have this desire to enter them and to fix them and to be full participants in them and to flourish in them. These are all an echo of God's voice that calls us to life. So we long for that kind of health and fullness in our intimate relationships with our husbands and wives, our spouses. We long for it with our children, with our little children and our grown children. We long for it with our parents. And I think our parents long for it with us. And we long for that kind of relationship with our siblings and with our friends. And we long for relationships in meaningful communities, in churches and neighborhoods and workplaces. All these kind of places that help create and shape and hold our identity. And we long for it in the biggest meta relationships we have too, the relationship we have to country and to culture and to democracy. We long for health in those areas. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that all humans long to be seen and known and valued for who they are. And we long to see and know and value others as well. We long to, in these relationships, to create something good. And these are all longings designed by God. And they are all longings that point to the nature of who God is and the kind of presence that He has in this world. And they are hard. Relationships are hard. Every single relationship I have, is fraught with hard choices, with back and forthness. This is where personal brokenness and blindness and selfishness and woundedness can have devastating consequences on the people around us. It's in our relationships that all the light can get in and all the darkness can get in as well. And it could take a whole lifetime to regain what's lost when a relationship has been darkly broken and when trust has been broken. Relationships are hard. So for relationships to even have a chance to start to flourish, I think there's this necessity built into it of one voice listening to another voice and then responding. And this listening and responding back and forth and then coming to something in the middle. And this is the only action, I think, from which mature and flourishing relationships can even start to happen. So I'll give a quick instance of this. First, let me just say that humans are also strange. So relationships are hard and humans are strange. That's church. But I know humans are strange because I've been one my whole life and I've lived with them my whole life. And even this week, even this morning, I looked at my husband, who I I really do truly adore. And he looked at me, who obviously he truly adores. And we both thought, look at you. And he looks at me, and he wonders why in the world, I'm not able to put the shoes away in such a way that we can functionally use the closet. And I look at him, and I wonder why this wonderful man does not have the capacity to put the dish towel in the oven rack thing, instead of just bunching it up and throwing it on the counter. And these are very, very small issues, really the smallest of the small relationship issues, but in the humorous way, they show us kind of this meat, this crux of every relationship. So just track with me here. Each one of us grows up in a different body. Each one of us is infleshed in such a way that no one else will ever have the same body, no one else will ever have the same influences, the same words or pictures running through our heads. Each one of us is so incredibly unique in our makeup and thus our perspective on the world. So someone who's standing over here is going to see a slightly different reality than someone who is standing over here, right? I mean, even our eyes do this when you kind of look at your thumb and do this. One eye is seeing my thumb from this way, one eye is seeing it from that way, but when I put them together, open both eyes, I'm seeing something more closer to the truth of the object, right? By the nature of our bodies and minds being separate and located in a specific place on earth that no one else could exactly inhabit, we will have different understandings of reality and different points of view and different ideas of what's important and different ways of making sense, different ways of getting through the world. And this might blow your mind, but this is actually how it was intended to be. We were built in this way. We were not built to be some amorphous hive mind, everybody thinking the same way. That is not what we were meant to be. We were meant to encounter each other over distance, geographical, physical distance, also emotional, intellectual distance. And we are made in such a way that we have to communicate and to dialogue with each other in that space in between us. And that's pretty amazing. I heard a poet, John O'Donohue, say it this summer. It's just incredible that we can make any sounds that can reach over and across to each other at all. The beauty of being human is that we are incredibly and intimately near each other. We know all about one another, yet we do not know, nor ever can know, what it's like inside another person. The truth about the world full of individuals is that the world is always larger, more intense, and stranger than our best individual thought could ever reach. So having different points of view is not a sin. Misunderstanding, miscommunication can happen, though, and the refusal to listen to the other, and the possibility for the dominance of one point of view over the other, that's where sin comes in. And that's where the potential for damage to each other and ourselves can happen. That's where the potential of any person or institution with the power to either ignore another's voice or not, that's where they can hurt others when it doesn't listen and when it doesn't dialogue well. I think I read something this week, Jonathan Swift said, we have just enough religion to make us hate each other and not enough to make us love each other. But how we choose to respond to the other, how we listen to our differences and to dialogue with other points of view, that is the invitation from an incarnated Jesus to us. So I can listen to why Brad thinks it's very important that the shoes be lined up in the closet so that he can open it and get things out easily. And I can listen to that, and I can understand why that's good for his way of the world and good for his understanding of what makes life doable. And he can listen to why I understand the dishcloth to be hung up is better than bunched up in the counter. And we can listen and hear and respond and take each other's views seriously and work to find a solution and work to continue to flourish in our relationship. So I was thinking about this a lot this week, and the key words that were standing out to me were listening and responding. It's no small thing that the Hebrew word for obedience is actually rooted in the word to listen. So listen and obey. Obey is not just do what I do because I say it. I mean, it might be like that for 3-year-olds when you need them to not run out in the road. But for grown-ups, to obey is to listen and then to respond to what's being said, to listen and respond to your mother's point of view, to your son's point of view, to listen and respond to your neighbor's point of view, listen and respond to those who've experienced something you haven't or who have knowledge that you do not, and then respond with your own life and your own knowledge. How about listen and respond to God and to his voice and to his way and his point of view about what makes human life flourish. Being made for relationship means listening and responding to this word. And what we're finding in this meditation on relationships, I think, can be described as encounter. So at the heart of relationship is this space in between us where we encounter, where we touch, where we listen to words and to other bodies and to each other's hearts, where we speak words back and forth, where we dialogue, and yeah, we probably argue and we learn and we grow imperfectly, but we keep doing it. And that is this echo of God's voice, this echo that is calling us to God. So our lives are encounter. And I think our faith is encounter. And we're going to switch gears here and wonder together at where then encounter intersects with Jesus. So I just want you to take a minute, and because we're really into this new interactive Sunday sermon thing, I'm going to get you to think of stories of encounter. Stories from the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, Jesus stories, anything that you can think of, first thing that comes to mind of an encounter that sticks out. And I want you to shout it out if you can, if you have that in you. Woman at the well, yes. Even the snake. Oh. Any other one? Sorry? Abraham and Isaac on Mount Sinai. Yeah. Abraham and the three strangers. Anyone else? The wise men, yes. Sorry, I'm going to need a better listening ear for this sort of thing. Yes, Jesus and the woman caught in adultery in the line in the sand. It's remarkable how many stories there are. I mean, this whole story of our faith that we come here to hear about every Sunday, it's a story of encounter after encounter. And we're going to delve into one of those stories this morning. No one said it, so that's good. But it's a Jesus story where we dramatically see this encounter across the space between people. So to set the scene, in the Gospels, Jesus is already different than other prophets and preachers. The drama of this Roman occupation and the tension of this religious communal life created a lot of men who, like him, traveled and taught, were considered prophets. There was lots of them running around the area at that time. But there's nothing like Jesus in the literature of that time. So while there's lots of history about these other prophets and their teachings, their speeches, their precepts, what's unique to the gospel accounts is how they recorded these small stops between the speeches and teachings of Jesus. They recorded these interruptions in the grand ministry that he was about. These little constant encounters are remembered, not just the concepts and the precepts and the new rules for living. And I think it's telling us something that those moments are what was recorded. And even more telling is the fact that these encounters recorded are with really rich people and really poor people and really sick people and powerful people and powerless people. Jesus' ministry and the importance of his ministry to those who followed him was definitively rooted in those encounters. These totally unexpected encounters, not planned, well, maybe planned, but they are what constitute the meat of his work when we read those Gospels. And this fact alone in the life of Jesus should startle us a little bit. There's not one bit of human reality, not one bit of life, interrupting kind of life that's an impediment to his message, his work, and his love. There's not one encounter that distracts him from what he was supposed to be doing. It's almost like the God of the universe is incarnated in every encounter. Encountering others is his work. So in Mark 5, there's a story of encounter like this. Jesus and his friends, they enter a village in Galilee. It's rural. It's a fishing village. It's backwater. It doesn't even give its name in the Gospels. It's a no-name town, maybe 500 people or less. And by this time, Jesus was a bit of a celebrity, however reluctant. There's been rumors in the air, at the markets, over the fences. There's been talk of this prophet out of Nazareth who teaches with authority and who heals not with magic or incantation or payment, but he heals with a word or two and with his presence and his proximity, maybe a touch. And this sort of celebrity news does in this village what it still does in us. It makes them hopeful. It makes them talk to each other. It makes them want to see it. Out of curiosity and out of this kind of unspoken hunger to harness something that will work for them. Maybe somehow this Jesus coming to their village will make them bigger and better by experiencing it. Maybe it'll heal them. Maybe it'll give them what they've wanted. And we still respond to celebrity and trends and buzz in this way. We get excited about what the possibility might be. And Jesus comes to this no-name town, and he's met by the synagogue leader or the synagogue ruler. He's a powerful person in the small town. But he comes with a desperate request of Jesus. Jairus' daughter is sick to the point of death. Would Jesus please come? And Jesus stops for this encounter and says, yes, of course I'll come with you. And the crowd, which would have been mostly men in this segregated culture, surged around Jesus here in the small village commons. And they were eager to watch the action, eager to see the local celebrity at work. Something's going to happen. Oh, I heard about this. Let's go follow him. Shouts and laughter and this buzz of excitement, probably the heat from the sun and the heat from all these bodies. This whole scene was making its way towards Jairus' house. And then suddenly Jesus stops. And the whole procession jostles. And probably those on the outskirts of this group of the action keep talking and laughing. The awareness that something is going on is slow to reach them. But Jesus stops suddenly and says, "Who touched me? Who touched me? Who reached out across this space between us and touched me and took some of my power?" And the disciples, maybe with that kind of side-eye, patronizing side-eye, say, look around you. Everybody is touching you. But Jesus looks around again, and he looks at their faces, and he sees one who absolutely should not be there. And he looks at her, for indeed it's a woman who dared to reach out. And I wonder if he asked again, who touched me? Who are you? Who touched me? Who are you that has taken some of my power? He is saying it right to her. And Jesus knows something significant has happened in this encounter. He felt it. And she probably makes this small movement forward and says, I did. I thought if I grasped you, even just a bit of you, I would be healed. And in that moment, she knows that she was. Now just imagine the crowd's response. This is a small town. And these are the men of the village here to see, with this mixture of hopeful and maybe a bit of greedy hunger, the Jesus who everyone is talking about. And they're on their way to see a miracle. And then Jesus draws the attention away from this immediate need happening to this woman who is on her knees in the midst of them not looking up. And they know who she is. Immediately, a ripple of revulsion shivers through this crowd. This nameless woman has been bleeding and hemorrhaging for 12 years. She's been experiencing menstrual bleeding for 12 years. And in both the religious and Roman culture of this village, that is a relationship death sentence. Because in this culture, the broader Roman culture and the Jewish culture within it, we know that when a woman was menstruating, she was regarded with wariness and even downright hostility and derision. We have the writings of Pliny the Elder, a Roman writer and historian writing in this area a little bit after the time of this, but in this definite culture. And he writes, this is really good stuff, he writes that contact with a woman who is having her monthly flow through dress or through touch would make new wine sour, would make crops wither, kill skin grafts, dry seeds in the garden, cause the fruit of trees to fall off, dim the bright surface of mirrors, dull the edge of steel, kill bees. I'm not sure how, but it does. Rust iron and bronze. Dogs that come near a bleeding woman become insane and their bites poisonous. It's funny, but it's really not. And this is the world and culture that determined the encounter, that determined the kind of relationships these people, this woman, could have in Galilee. So you put that general culture together with the religious culture of this small Jewish town. So for hundreds of years, generation after generation, the Israelites, God's chosen people, the Jews, have been telling themselves, we've been occupied and dominated because we didn't fully live by God's laws. So you better believe that those purity laws outlined in those Old Testament writings were being taken very seriously. And within Jewish purity laws, when a woman was bleeding, even if you touched a dead body or if you touched a dead animal, you were then unclean. And if you're unclean, you cannot be touched, and you cannot touch anything else so as to not make anyone else unclean. And being unclean was a big deal because an unclean person could not experience God. An unclean person could not go to the temple. They could not make sacrifices. They could not make public prayers. You cannot enter God's presence and experience God in their culture when you were unclean. So it was important that you avoided someone who was unclean. When a woman was having her period, she'd be separated. And then when she was done, she would go through a purification ritual and be brought back into the group. So for people, I mean, not just women, anyone who touched a dead body, touched a dead animal, there's this steady rhythm of being out and in due to being unclean. And for women, it was due to the fact of their biology and nothing they could do or not do about it. So within this culture and within this religion, this woman dared to be encountered. And I don't think the trauma of this woman's life could actually be overstated. Everyone in this town and every man in this crowd knows that this woman has been bleeding and is unclean, and therefore beyond the realm of touch. She has not had a moment in the last 12 years where she has been touched or where she has touched someone. She has not known any form of contact, let alone a hug or even a welcome. No one has said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you here." No one has said that to her in 12 years. Depending on how strict this town was, there were some rules that you couldn't even touch a piece of furniture that an unclean person had touched for fear of it making. So she was not welcome in anyone's home. How many subsequent years then has she been without conversation? How many subsequent years has she been without dialogue? How many have been without eye contact? How many people even remember her name anymore? And I'm sure some people felt pity. Maybe some people left food out for her. All her money, the text says, every resource she had been spent on doctors trying to fix this. But after a while, how many people start to think that she must have done something wrong? This must somehow be her own fault. Because that's what we do. We somehow reassure ourselves that this horrible thing that is happening to someone else won't happen to us. It must be something they did. How long was it until they all started avoiding her gaze? And once you do that, it's easy to forget that she has a heart and a voice and an experience. She had parents and a family. She has a background and a perspective. She is now just a body to be avoided. And she's been reduced to this one thing that she cannot do a thing about. This woman crouched unseen, and she risked making every man in that crowd unclean. Moreover, she dared to make the celebrity in their midst unclean, the prophet they eagerly hoped was going to do something that they could gossip about for weeks, the honored guest and the prophet who at this moment was on his way to Jairus' house, arguably the most powerful man in this village, to heal his daughter. Imagine Jairus' jaw dropping in that moment, the crowd cleared to reveal her, and the horror of what's going on dawns on him. Because his hope for his own daughter's life is in that one moment of touch, doomed. Jesus can't touch her now. Jesus can't even come into his house now because Jesus is unclean. His daughter's as good as dead. And indeed, a servant shoulders up to him and says, "It's too late. She's gone." And grief and rage probably don't even begin to start to describe what's erupting in Jairus and what's erupting in this crowd at the sight of this woman daring everything for encounter. Who are you who touched me? I imagine he's like this. Who are you that touched me? Who are you that took some of my power? Who are you that made me unclean and took some of my power and life and authority for themselves? Who? And I think that word, who are you, reaches out and across that distance to that woman. And I wonder if she told him her name. And I wonder how long it had been since she had told anyone her name. This is the power of this echo of relationship. this longing, which is a call for each of us to know encounter and to know relationship and to know the truth that we are made for each other. This is where this encounter intersects with Jesus. We are made to work through what it means that we have to encounter other human beings. We are not disembodied souls destined to transcend it all in a cloud of holiness. We are bodies and hearts and minds and souls made to reach out and meet in the middle. So it's hard, and we are weird creatures, and it requires work and effort and humility and listening and speaking up and forgiveness and a willingness to get unclean. But this is the echo we're talking about this fall. Every human is made for relationship. This unnamed woman was made for relationship, and it was her need for encounter that drew her to Jesus. For her, being saved by Jesus was not to come to some intellectual or even a moral conclusion about life. Her salvation came when Jesus showed up unexpectedly in her town, and she dared to think that even she might be made whole, and therefore able to enter the fullness of her birthright as a daughter of God made for relationship. That's what God intended for her all along, and that's why Jesus stopped everything to reach back across that space, and that's exactly what he does for every one of us here, even today. And Jesus didn't stop there. He, and his complete disregard for what other people thought made him unclean, then went to Jairus' house, and he dismissed the people and the sightseers there, the people who would gossip and hang around. And for the sake of that daughter, that 12-year-old girl, and the sake of those parents, he healed her without the crowd, without the fanfare. He did just what that encounter asked of him. This 12-year-old girl, so incredibly obviously loved by her parents, became everything to Jesus at that moment. And at the same time, this woman, rejected for 12 years, alone in this world, was of utmost importance to him. He stops everything in its tracks to restore both of them. He stops all his plans for that day to restore both. I mean, obviously, encounter. This was his plan for that day. And I love thinking about how in both of these cases, these two women, one young, one old, one loved, one not, they are now both re-entering their lives. They're re-entering a life of relationship. They have a rebirthed lifetime ahead of them to figure out, to dialogue, and to reach across that space again and again, to live in real relationship. But what do they have now going into this new life? After meeting with Jesus, what do they have as they embark on a life of true relationship? Well, they have the assurance that his presence does indeed bring a capacity for wholeness. And they have the assurance that his power is for them and is on their side and is intended for life and for whole living. And these two women, one young, one old, have the assurance that their individual lives, their hearts and their minds are incredibly important. So important to Jesus in that moment, brought back to life, brought back to this world. That's what they had, and that's what we have. There are some questions I want to leave us with today. I think there are questions that you can take home and you can think about them. Think about the story you thought of when you thought of a story of encounter. Take that home with you this week. Follow it, see where it leads. But where are the encounters in your life? Where at work? Where in your home? Where on your Facebook feeds? Who is it that's reaching out across that space and reaching out to you? How can you listen to what's being said from another perspective? And how can we do that as a church? Who are you that is longing to reach out? And are you ready to answer and say your name and what you need? And are we all ready to hear and welcome another's name and another's story? What indeed is in that space between us? And the better question, of course, is who is in that space in between us? And who's in that space is, of course, Jesus, the Lord, the one whose presence, without payment or magic or incantation, can indeed restore us to him and to ourselves and to each other and to what our hearts have truly been longing for. Let's pray. I think you are the God of encounter, and I think you are the Jesus who spoke to that woman to each of us here today. You are the same Jesus who asks, who are you? Who dares to take some of my power? Who dares to be encountered? Father, help us to have open ears, to listen and respond where you are inviting us to listen and respond to others. Help us to have ears to listen and respond to you. And help us to know that we are rebirthed into this life. I love that line of that song, the endless road to rediscover what it means to live in relationship and how that is just carried and held by you. That is your longing for us. We thank you, Father, for everything and for bringing us here today. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.